Welcome to Subramani. I'm going to talk to you about Peter Lynch's love for dividend paying companies. So, for those who are young and who do not know who is Peter Lynch, of course, you can Google more about him. Peter Lynch ran Fidelity's Magellan Fund from 1977 till 1990 for about 13 years. He took the assets from something like 20 million to 14 billion, right? And he got 29% return in that period. But please remember, 13 years and 29%. 29% is huge, but 13 is small. So when that 13 becomes longer, that 29 would have come down. So that's very important. So when you look at a Peter Lynch, when you look at a Warren Buffett, the N is much longer, so therefore the R won't be so high. So please understand the impact. Peter Lynch is also the person who who's written 3 books, one up on Wall Street, Beating the Street, and one more something about Graham, learn to invest like a beginner or something like that. I mean, I'm sure you can Google and find the answer, but I'm going to talk about his fascination for dividend paying companies and the fact that there used to be a book available. In fact, he talks about that book as the starting point for him, perhaps. In the book called Handbook of Dividend Achievers, he has discussed his fantasies about, I wouldn't say fantasies, his love for dividends. And so the dividend achiever he defines a dividend achiever, or the book defines as a dividend achiever is a company which has increased dividends for the last 10 years in a row. And there would be very many such companies in the US, and some of them and this book is in the 90s. So picking up stocks in the 90s, and he's saying the same companies are still in existence. So if there is a company which has paid dividends for 10 years in a row and increased dividends, he says it's a no-brainer buying it, right? You keep on getting higher and higher dividends, and dividends almost always grow at a rate faster than the rate of inflation. So one of the best ways to invest or to retire is to say, I will create a portfolio of good dividend masters or dividend champions, whatever you want to call them. They are also called dividend aristocrats. Unfortunately, in India, we don't put too much emphasis on dividends. In fact, there is a wealth study which happens out of Bombay. It has happened for 26-27 years, where they don't consider dividend. In fact, they call companies like NTPC as value destroyer without considering the dividend, and I think that's ridiculous. But in India, there is not so much of importance given to dividends, in the sense that investors don't look at dividends as part of the return. So I would happily go and invest in a company which is in a fund which concentrates on buying equity shares which pay good dividends. But please understand one thing. When companies pay dividend, the money comes to you, and that money will compound. That is the essence, right? How will you compound it? Maybe buying more shares, more shares of the same company. We should not forget that the amount not distributed also compounds. So, for example, if 100 rupees is the EPS, PAT or EPS for Reliance, and Reliance decides to pay 30 rupees as dividend. Remember, 70 rupees stays on in the business. And a good businessman, could be an MNC, could be a HUL, could be any company, and a good chance that the company compounds that 70 rupees more smartly than you do. So yes, dividends are a good way to look at for retired people, but it does not mean that all of us should look only at dividend companies. We should also look at those companies which are potentially going to pay higher dividend later on, but right now they are busy establishing market share. You see shares like, say, a Swiggy which is not listed, or a share like Zomato which is listed, or a company like Indigo which is not listed, or Akasa which is not listed. Indigo is listed, Akasa is not listed. So all these companies have an EPS. So there is some pressure to give some portion of it as a dividend, and the others go back into get plowed back to increase market share and things like that. So those companies will pay less dividend. But coming back to Peter Lynch's list, which is a book which says these are the dividend champions. I think Moody's used to publish it. I do not know whether it's still getting published, but one good thing which has happened thanks to the internet, all of us can go and look for such companies which pay good dividends and which have been paying increasing dividends, which means they paid in dividend in 1990, 91, 92, 93, and they've been increasing dividends. Or you don't want to go back as far as 1990, go to even 207, 208, which means you'll have a 12, 13-year record of increasing dividends. Peter Lynch says it's a no-brainer buying that, because when the company does well, the management looks at it and says, okay, let's increase the dividend. So Peter Lynch again says that the difference between debt and equity is there is no borrower who will say, oh, my profits have gone up, so I will pay more interest. That doesn't happen. But when profits go up and company does well, the company definitely pays more dividend. So a company which is successful and pays more dividend is definitely good for you, good for us as a shareholder, but it does not mean the company which does not pay dividend but which knows what to do with that money, has a good ROCE and RONW, is also not a bad buy, right? So I was looking at, so I said let me search through the US sites, because it's easier to give US example without worrying about what the regulator will think rather than give Indian examples. But I'm sure there'd be very good Indian examples of dividend paying companies, and they could be in the dividend list. So here is the list that I picked from Invesco. Invesco's list in US. So they have Microsoft, they have Walmart, Johnson & Johnson, Visa, Procter & Gamble, United Health Group, Home Depot, and Verizon Communications. So these are the companies which have been paying good dividends, and over long periods of time they have created wealth for the unit holders of this fund. There is a Putnam fund which just buys shares in the Moody's list and keeps holding them as long as they are in that list. I am surprised that there is no such list available in India, or at least I do not know. I stand corrected. If somebody can come in the comments column and say there is a book like this published. But I think thanks to the internet, you don't need a book to be published. You can just go and look at all the dividend yield stories, right? So dividend yield stories or value investing stories, and go and see how much is the dividend yield on those on their portfolio, and that would be a good fund for you to invest, because you know that the growth is going to come in terms of dividends, which are far easier to guess than the terminal value of a company. Let's suppose today Swiggy is getting valued or Zomato is getting valued. You have to depend on the future cash flows and the future terminal value. But if you take a company like Tata Power or Larsen & Toubro or HDFC Bank, you know the current value is high simply because its earnings are there and the dividends are there. So when you are valuing these companies, you know you have to value the dividends. When you are valuing companies like Zomato, you have to only value the residual value, because there is no current cash flows to talk about. I mean, there is no dividend at all, because the money, whatever they earn, even after they make profit, would go into plowing back into growing, right? So chances are they will not pay any dividend even if they have a positive income. So these the dividend yield portfolios have done well in the US, even though last few years have been very bad for value companies. The dividend paying companies have done well for the shareholder. So what happens is, even if you miss the growth for whatever reasons, the company is not growing, or it's more a value investment, but a value investment has an advantage of the cash flow called dividend, with which you can buy some other shares, right? So those are the advantages. And Peter Lynch, who is known as a growth person, also talks about dividend. Of course, he's been also called a value investor, growth investor, but very clearly he loves dividend, and so should you. If you just pick up some of those shares which give good dividend yields, be very careful. PSUs are forced to pay dividends, so if that force goes away, they may not pay dividends, right? So be careful, don't have too many PSUs or too many MNCs. Have a combination of some good solid Indian businesses which are dividend yield, some MNCs, some PSUs. That's how a portfolio gets built. Thank you.